I never imagined that a life that once felt so full could turn into one of endless dissatisfaction and pain. My name is Karen, and this is the story of how I came to realize that happiness isn't something you can hold onto when it's slipping through your fingers. I'm 48 years old, working as an administrative assistant in a small office here in Houston, Texas. I love my job, but it's never been enough to shield me from the turbulence of my home life. My husband, Mike, who is 3 years older than me, used to be a confident man, but a recent demotion at work has turned him into a shadow of his former self. He's now a man who takes his frustrations out on the people he loves the most, me and our teenage daughter, Sarah. Mike's anger has been a constant presence in our home for months now. I often find myself walking on eggshells, trying to avoid any situation that might set him off. His temper can flare up over the smallest things, but what cuts the deepest are his harsh words about my weight. "Why can't you just control yourself?" he'll snap. "You've put on so much weight, Karen. It's embarrassing." These words are like daggers. I try to ignore them, hoping that he'll see how hard I'm working to maintain a sense of normalcy despite his attacks. I work hard, juggle responsibilities at home, and try to keep our family life as stable as possible. But every time he opens his mouth to criticize me, it feels like the ground beneath me shifts just a little more. Adding to the tension is my mother-in-law, Helen. At 74, she's still very much a part of our daily lives. She lives with us, and her presence is a constant reminder of my inadequacies. Helen has her own way of making me feel like a failure, often wrapped in what she pretends is concern for my well-being. "Karen, are you really going to have that second serving?" she'll ask, her voice laced with a patronizing edge. "You know, you should be more mindful of what you eat." These comments come from a place of judgment rather than genuine concern. Helen's disapproval is always thinly veiled, and it only adds to the suffocating atmosphere in our home. Mike and Helen seem to be in agreement on one thing: I'm the problem. My daughter, Sarah, is the one bright spot in my life. At 16, she's perceptive and compassionate, and she can see through the pretense. She tries to stand up for me whenever she can, but it's hard for her to go against both her father and grandmother. She's a high school sophomore, and despite the challenges at home, she's managed to excel academically and maintain her kind-hearted nature. One evening, after another exhausting day at work and dealing with Mike's latest round of criticism, I came home to find Helen's critical gaze already waiting for me. The stress was mounting, but I tried to keep my composure. Dinner was supposed to be a time of normalcy, but it felt more like a battleground. Mike had come home late, which was unusual. He walked in with a smirk on his face, holding a bottle of wine spritzer. "I thought we'd celebrate making it through another day," he said, his tone oddly cheerful. I didn't think much of it at the time. We sat down at the dinner table, and as usual, Mike and Helen began their verbal jabs. My plate was filled with what I assumed was a standard dinner, but the way they watched me eat made me feel uneasy. As I took a sip of my wine spritzer, something didn't taste right. There was an odd, spicy aftertaste that lingered unpleasantly. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew stronger. I looked over at Helen, who was sipping from her glass of wine as well. A knot tightened in my stomach. Something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. My heart raced as I watched Helen take another sip. I could see her face flush, her eyes widening in surprise. She started coughing, her discomfort evident. The spicy taste in my own drink now felt like it was setting my mouth on fire. "Are you all right, Helen?" I asked, trying to sound concerned. Helen's response was choked and unintelligible. Mike, however, looked on with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. It wasn't until Helen's coughing turned into a full-blown gagging fit that Mike finally made a move. "What did you do to the drink, Mike?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. Mike shrugged, a look of feigned innocence on his face. Just thought I'd spice things up a bit. Didn't think it would be such a big deal. I knew then that this wasn't just a prank. It was a deliberate act of cruelty, a final push in the long line of abuses I had endured. The realization hit me hard. Sarah had been watching from the sidelines, her face a mask of shock and disappointment. Her support was my only comfort, but even that felt fragile in the face of Mike's increasing hostility. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. The spicy drink incident was the last straw. I needed to make a change for the sake of my own sanity and Sarah's well-being. But I didn't know how or where to begin. As I listened to the quiet, my thoughts were filled with the weight of what lay ahead. I needed to find the strength to confront this toxic environment. I needed to make a decision that would change our lives forever. And though I was scared, I knew I couldn't let fear keep me trapped in this cycle any longer. The next few days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. I was haunted by the memory of that evening, Mike's cruel prank, Helen's choking fit, and the heavy silence that followed. It was clear to me now. Our home was no longer a sanctuary but a battlefield where I was constantly under attack. I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. The humiliation and emotional abuse had been building up for far too long. As I looked around our house, it felt more like a prison than a home. Every corner seemed to whisper reminders of the resentment and anger that festered within its walls. Sarah had been a beacon of support through all this, but even she was starting to feel the strain. I could see it in her eyes, the way she flinched at every raised voice and tensed whenever Mike was around. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the harsh reality of our situation, but I wasn't sure how. One afternoon, after dropping Sarah off at school, I found myself sitting at my desk, the paperwork in front of me feeling like a mountain I couldn't climb. My mind was preoccupied with thoughts of escape. I had been quietly planning my exit, researching my options, and trying to figure out how to make a clean break. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. It was Sarah, calling from school. Her voice was strained, and I could tell she was upset. "Mom, can you come to school? I need to talk to you," she said, her voice cracking. I hurried to the school, my heart pounding with worry. When I arrived, Sarah was waiting for me by the front office. Her face was pale, and she looked like she had been crying. I wrapped my arms around her, trying to offer comfort. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice full of concern. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes filled with determination. "I overheard something today. Some kids were talking about how Mike is acting at home. They know he's been demoted and how it's been affecting all of us." I didn't want to say anything, but it's clear that everyone at school knows what's going on. I felt a surge of shame and anger. It was one thing to deal with our issues behind closed doors, but the thought of others knowing our struggles made me feel exposed and vulnerable. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I never wanted you to be in this position." She shook her head, her expression firm. "Mom, it's not your fault. You've done everything you can. I just want you to know that I'm here for you. And I'm not going to let them get away with this." Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves. It was clear that Sarah's support was unwavering, and it gave me the strength to keep going. We talked for a while, and I could see the resolve in her eyes. She was ready to fight back, and so was I. Later that evening, as we sat down for dinner, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Mike was still trying to act normal, but his efforts felt forced. Helen was unusually quiet, perhaps still embarrassed by the incident with the spiked drink. Mike finally broke the silence, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, Karen, have you decided how you're going to handle your little problem? Or are you just going to keep avoiding it?" I looked him in the eye, refusing to be intimidated. "I've decided that I can't live like this anymore. I've been planning to make some changes, and I'm going to start by standing up for myself." Mike's face darkened, and Helen's eyes widened in surprise. I could feel the weight of their judgment, but I stood my ground. I had made up my mind, and there was no turning back. That night, as I lay in bed, I prepared myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. I had gathered evidence of Mike's abusive behavior and Helen's unkindness, preparing to present it to Mike as part of our separation process. I was ready to fight for a future where Sarah and I could be free from this toxic environment. The realization hit me. I was no longer a passive participant in my own life. I was taking control, and that was a powerful feeling. I had to stay strong for Sarah and for myself. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. The days that followed were tense. Every morning, I woke up with a mixture of dread and determination. I knew that things had to change, but I also knew that facing Mike and Helen would be difficult. The atmosphere in our home was thick with unspoken anger, and I could feel the pressure building. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I could sense that something was off. Mike's mood was darker than usual, and Helen seemed unusually quiet, as if she was bracing for something. I had no idea what was coming, but I knew that tonight could be the night when everything came to a head. Mike was unusually quiet as well, only breaking the silence to make snide remarks about my cooking. His comments were thinly veiled attacks, designed to provoke me. I kept my responses short, trying to maintain my composure. As the meal progressed, Mike suddenly announced, "I thought we could have a little celebration tonight. I made a special drink for everyone." He reached for a bottle of wine spritzer from the fridge and poured generous amounts into glasses. The scent of the drink was faintly spicy, but I didn't think much of it. I was preoccupied with the growing tension between us. Helen, who had been mostly silent, took her glass and sipped it without comment. I noticed her wince slightly, but I assumed it was just the spiciness of the drink. We continued eating, trying to make small talk despite the strained atmosphere. As Helen started coughing and gasping for air, I felt a wave of panic. Her face turned red, and she struggled to speak. It was clear that something was terribly wrong. "Helen, are you okay?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. Helen could barely respond, but I saw the look of realization in her eyes. She knew that the drink was to blame, just as I had begun to suspect. Mike's face was a mask of feigned innocence, but I could see the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. In the chaos that followed, I quickly switched my drink with Helen's when she wasn't looking. The spicy concoction had been intended for me, but it seemed that Mike's plan had backfired. Helen's distress led to a dramatic scene. The dinner ended abruptly as she was rushed to the hospital, leaving Mike and me alone in the house. The silence that followed was heavy with unresolved tension and unspoken accusations. Once the house was empty, I took the opportunity to confront Mike. I was shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "Mike, this has to stop. I've had enough of your cruel games and Helen's harsh comments. I can't live like this anymore." Mike's reaction was defensive and angry. "You're just overreacting, Karen. It was a harmless prank. You always blow things out of proportion." His dismissive attitude was the last straw. I had reached the breaking point. I knew I had to act, not just for my own sake but for Sarah's as well. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering evidence of Mike's behavior and preparing divorce papers. The next morning, as Sarah and I prepared for the day, I took a deep breath and handed her the divorce papers. Her eyes widened in shock, but I could see the relief behind her concern. "Mom, is this really happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound as reassuring as possible. "It's time for us to move on. We need to get out of this toxic environment and start fresh." Sarah hugged me tightly, and I could feel her support bolstering my resolve. We began making plans to move to my parents' house, where we would find the stability and care we desperately needed. That evening, I finally told Mike about our decision. His reaction was one of anger and disbelief, but I stood firm. I'm leaving, Mike. I can't be part of this anymore. I've filed for divorce, and there's nothing you can do to change my mind. Mike's face turned a dark shade of red, and he stormed out of the room. The house was filled with a sense of finality. The decision was made, and there was no turning back. As Sarah and I packed our things, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. It was a new beginning, but it was also a daunting change. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew that leaving Mike and Helen behind was the only way to find peace and happiness. The move to my parents' house was a huge relief. Their home in Houston was a world away from the chaos and toxicity of my old life. As soon as we arrived, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. My parents welcomed us with open arms, and the warmth of their support was a stark contrast to the coldness we had left behind. My mom and dad were understanding and attentive. They did their best to make Sarah and me feel at home, providing a safe space where we could begin to heal. My dad, always the practical one, helped us settle in, while my mom took charge of making sure we had everything we needed. I finalized the divorce from Mike within a few weeks. The legal process was draining, but having my parents and Sarah by my side made it bearable. Mike continued to struggle both professionally and personally. He was left behind with Helen, who, despite reaching out to us occasionally, was now facing the reality of her actions. I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice in the way things unfolded, though I remained focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. The days in my parents' house were filled with a new kind of routine. I began to rebuild my life from scratch. I had to find a new job, and thankfully, my previous employer reached out with an offer to return. It was comforting to know that my professional life could offer some stability, especially after everything I had been through. One unexpected and positive turn of events was meeting a new, understanding person in my life. My boss, who had always been kind and supportive, expressed a deeper interest in me. His name was David, and he was different from anyone I had known before. He respected my efforts and saw me for who I truly was, someone deserving of kindness and love. David and I started seeing each other outside of work, and our relationship grew steadily. He was patient and understanding, offering me a safe space to share my experiences without judgment. With him, I felt a genuine connection and a sense of hope for the future. Sarah, too, was adjusting well to our new life. She thrived in the supportive environment of my parents' home and did well in her studies. Her resilience and courage were inspiring, and I was proud of the young woman she was becoming. We spent a lot of quality time together, doing things that made us both happy and slowly rebuilding our lives. Despite the new beginnings, there were occasional moments of doubt and fear about the future. It was natural to worry about what lay ahead, but I learned to embrace these feelings as part of the healing process. With the support of my parents and David, I found strength in focusing on the present and planning for a brighter future. Helen's attempts to reach out continued, but I remained firm in my decision to keep my distance. Reconnecting with the past would only bring back the pain I had worked so hard to overcome. My priority was to protect my well-being and that of my daughter. As time went on, the scars from my previous life began to heal. I was no longer the woman who had endured emotional abuse and felt trapped. I was stronger, more self-assured, and ready to embrace a new chapter. My relationship with David grew deeper, and we began to discuss our future together with optimism. The journey had been long and arduous, but it led me to a place where I could finally find happiness and peace. I realized that resilience wasn't just about surviving the difficult times, but also about having the strength to rebuild and move forward. Looking back, I understood the importance of self-respect and support systems. They had been my pillars of strength, helping me to stand tall and make the decisions that changed my life for the better. My story was a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of knowing one's worth. As I closed this chapter of my life, I felt a renewed sense of hope and a readiness to face whatever came next. With Sarah by my side and a future filled with promise, I embraced the journey ahead with confidence and optimism. My life had transformed, and I was finally on the path to finding true happiness and fulfillment.